In this lesson, we're going to take a look at subtools. Now, when you're working with a ZBrush model, you'll oftentimes want to combine different Z tools into a single Z tool while maintaining their individual subdivision levels and texture settings. So what that means is, in the example of the superhero that you see on screen here, I've got subtools for the mask, the head, the eyes, the pants, the gloves, the shirt, the boots, the belt, and if I scroll down this list here, you see I've got subtools for the pouches, the belt loops, and the belt buckle. So each one of these individual parts is its own Z tool. If I come down here and press the Expose button in the interface, ZBrush will actually expose all of these subtools out and allow me to see which individual subtools are which. If I want to bring them all back together, I can just press the Expose button again, and they'll bring all those tools together. So the idea behind subtools is that instead of having a single Z tool that you subdivide up, and then if there's any other costume elements or horns, fingernails, armor bits, accessories, anything that you want to accompany that model, you don't have to bake it down into the same OBJ file or into the same Z tool. It can actually be a separate subtool, which is its own Z tool with its own subdivision levels and its own texture coordinates. So what that means is here, if we look at the superhero's hood, if I come down here to the geometry menu, this has 5 subdivision levels, and obviously it's poly painted right now with the color red. I can step down to the lowest subdivision level and simplify that model, and I can sculpt on that independently from the head, which sits underneath the cowl. Now, if I wanted to select that head, I could come back to my subtool menu here and select it manually, or I could just Alt-click on the head right here in the document window, and you see that it actually selects that Z tool. You can tell which subtool is selected because it has a dark band underneath it here. Now, in the case of the head, if I scroll down here and look at geometry, this has 7 subdivision levels, and obviously it has some poly paint on there. So the same holds true for each of these subtools. Each one of them is its own Z tool that can be poly painted or texture mapped independently of each other. They're just locked together in relationship as I rotate around the model. That allows me to keep costume elements in place. That allows me to keep fingernails and toes, eyeballs, teeth, anything that I want to group together into a single model. If you look in your light box under the tool palette, here you've got a demo soldier. And again, this is another model that has multiple subtools. Again, here under the subtool palette, you can see all the different pieces that are listed. So going back to the superhero character, this is the model from my book ZBrush Digital Sculpting Human Anatomy, and I've made this available with downloads for these lectures if you want to open and reference this model as well. So how does subtools work? Well, if we want to access them, they're found under the tool menu. Remember, the tool menu is sort of your centralized menu for each Z tool you're working on. Everything that is pertinent to this Z tool I will find under the Z tool menu. And here we find this Z tool's subtools. So at the top of the list there is the hood. The first Z tool is always going to carry the name of the Z tool itself, the file save as name. The next one down has been named head, eyes, pants, gloves, shirt, boots, belt, etc. Now, these eyeball icons here allow you to turn on and off visibility. If I turn the eyeball off on the current Z tool, it'll turn off visibility on everyone else. Then if I want to individually turn back on visibility, I can just turn on the eyeballs for those particular Z tools. Another fast way to see just the Z tool you're working on is to press the solo button here. And you'll notice within the solo button there's a smaller dynamic button. If I turn that on, when I rotate my model, it will dynamically go into solo mode so I can see just the tool that I'm working on. I can turn that off again and it returns to its normal behavior. So as I work my way down here, I can individually turn all of these eyeballs back on, or just turn the single eyeball or the main Z tool eyeball back on, and that will automatically turn on visibility for all my Z tools. Now, beneath this list of subtools, you'll find several buttons and arrows here. These arrows allow me to move my selection up and down through the list. Now this would be mapped to the up and down arrows on the keyboard. And now here you'll see I've got a little angular arrow. This would be hotkeyed to control up arrow or control down arrow. This allows me to move subtools within this list. So if I want the shirt and the pants to be together, I'll select the shirt and then just click twice to move the shirt above the pants. If I want the boots under the pants, I'll do the same. Just click up, and that moves the boots up underneath the pants. You'll notice there's a button here called List All. There's a hotkey for that, and that is the letter N. If I press that, it will just give me a list of all my subtools, which I can then select. I can get that out here in the menu. If I press N, I can then quickly select subtools right here off the list. That's another very quick way of selecting subtools, right up there with just alt-clicking on the subtool that you want to select, hitting N, and then selecting the pertinent subtool. Now, you've got the option to rename your subtools here. So, by default, this is probably not going to be named head. So you can click rename and name the tool however you like. So here I've changed it to character head. Now you also see I've got the option to set all of my subtools to their lowest subdivision level or set them all to the highest. This is extremely useful when you're working on a very, very dense model with very, very many subtools. You can have many subtools in this list, to the point that it might actually be a bit difficult to move your model around if they are all at the highest subdivision level, especially if you're in 32-bit ZBrush. If you're working in the 64-bit version, it's not going to be as much of an issue. Sometimes, just in terms of efficiency when you're working, you'd like to have everything at its lowest subdivision level. Or perhaps you want to see everything at its highest subdivision level because you're about to do a render. It's not very convenient to go through and check the subdivision level for each one of these subtools manually. So you can see here the pants are at level 5 when there's actually 6 levels. I can very, very quickly go through and just automate the process by clicking all high, and then each subtool will have its subdivision level set to the highest setting. Here we've got the option to auto reorder. This is going to reorder our subtools by vertex count. So you can decide to auto reorder these, or you can manually order them. My preference is to usually manually order my subtools in a way that's logical. I know that if I'm working from the top of the head down, I will just move my elements into the list so they follow a logical flow. So the first thing I would touch would be the hood. The second thing would be the head. This is as if I was just casting a ray of light down through the model. The next thing would be the shirt. So I'll move the shirt up. Then I will move the pants up. Now I'll probably leave things like the belt and the accessories at the bottom of the list, just because I know that if I need to grab a belt loop or a pouch, I can just scroll down to the bottom of the list to see those. I'll take the boots and I'll move those up. Now I can scroll down here and you can see I've got my belt loops, utility belt, the belt itself, eyes, gloves, these are going to need to move up, and belt buckle. So the gloves I'll move up next to the shirt, and the eyes I will move up underneath the head. There we go. So I've now manually ordered my subtool listing. Now if you want to copy a subtool, you can select it and then copy it. Now I can move into a different tool and I can then paste my subtool. So I can paste subtools between Z tools this way. It's extremely convenient. Let's go back to our original model here. So copy and paste just allow me to copy subtools and then paste them into other Z tools that are loaded up in ZBrush. If I want to duplicate a Z tool, that will allow me to take a subtool. Right here, if I select the shirt and then click duplicate, it will simply make a copy of the shirt right there in the subtool list. And you'll notice that one is named Shirt, the original, and the new one is named Shirt 1. Now if I want to remove that subtool, I'll just click the delete button. Oops, I just clicked duplicate again, so I'll need to remove two. I'll click the delete button, and it's going to ask me if I'm sure I want to do it, because it's not an undoable operation. Click OK, and then it will remove that subtool. I'll do it again. I'll click delete and then click OK. Now you do have the option to click always OK, and that will just stop warning you for that current ZBrush session. If you click delete on a subtool, it will just go ahead and delete it. Now you'll notice I have these two buttons here, Append and Insert. Append and Insert allow me to insert Z-tools into the subtool stack. It's actually rather similar to copying and pasting, but in this case, if I want to take, let's say, the goggles from the demo soldier, I've selected the goggles now, and if I come back over to my superhero, and then I click Append, and select the Z-tool here, goggles. I could also select the polymesh or any other Z-tool that I had loaded into this tool palette. If I select that, it will now append the goggles to the bottom of the list there. The goggles are actually quite a bit larger in scale, so I'll just move those down using transpose. And then we can scale them using transpose scale. Now, if I want to insert rather than append, what that will do is it will insert my subtool between two others. So I'm going to delete that set of goggles that we just imported. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to select the head. Now, if I click Insert instead of Append, it will do the exact same thing. It will now insert the goggles between these two Z-tools. So rather than appending it to the bottom of the list, Insert will insert that Z-tool into the list where I have it selected. Select those goggles now, and I will click Delete. Now down here in my Delete options, you'll see I've got Delete, Delete Other, and Delete All. Delete Other will delete everything but the currently selected subtool. Delete All will delete all my subtools. Now this is very useful, Delete All, because if you notice sometimes when you're working in ZBrush, your tool palette will become crowded with a whole bunch of different models, and those are all sitting in memory. So if you want to clear something out of your tool palette here, all you need to do is go into your subtool menu, go down to Delete, and then select Delete All. Click OK, and now it will clear that tool out of your tool palette. So I can come back up and select my superhero once again. Now you'll see that we've got several different options listed here that are collapsed. There's Split, Merge, Remesh, Project, and Extract. So Split will allow me to actually split things into subtools depending on their polygrouping. This is extremely useful. So let's go ahead and open up a different model that will let us examine and demonstrate this particular use. So here we have a skeleton model, and if we look, there are no subtools. However, if we go into polyframe mode by clicking the polyframe button here or Shift F on the keyboard, you can see that there's different polygroups assigned for different parts of the body. Now what that means is I can Control Shift click on a color-coded area and then isolate it from the others. Polygroups are just a way to color code and then isolate and quickly select different groups of faces within ZBrush. So if I Control Shift click on the rib cage, then Control Shift click and drag on the background, I can invert that visibility. If I were to Control Shift click on the pelvis and I decide I want to show everything again, I can just Control Shift click on the background and then everything comes back. Now, the reason I wanted to open this Z-tool with the polygrouping is if we come down here to the Split menu, you'll see that there's an option to group split. So if I click the Group Split button, it tells me it's not an undo operation. I'll just go ahead and click OK. It now split that model into subtools based on my polygrouping. So it's a very easy way to go in and take a model that maybe you've set up in an external polygon modeling program and bring it into ZBrush and then organize it by polygroup and then break it up into subtools based on those polygroupings. Now, if we come back down here to split, you'll see that there's an option for split hidden, which is currently grayed out. So I'm just going to go to the skull here. Let's go ahead and turn on solo, so the skull's the only thing visible. And I will turn on polyframe. Now you'll see that there's cervical vertebrae here in this model. If I go to my polygroups menu and click auto group, that will automatically polygroup every individual model within this Z tool. So I can easily hide everything but the cervical vertebrae and the hyoid bone. So let's go ahead and group visible, invert the visibility, and then just group visible again. So now with just this subtool isolated, that's the skull, if I hide the cervical vertebrae, go to split and click split hidden, it will split those hidden faces out into their own subtool, which you can see there. Now there's several other options here which don't really come into play nearly as often. There's split to similar parts, split to parts, split unmasked points, and splitting masked points. Split to similar parts and splitting to parts would allow you to split apart something with very similar pieces like 2 hands, 2 feet, finger bones, toe bones. Splitting masked and unmasked is quite self-explanatory. If you have a masked area here, let's say I've got a mask at the top of the head, and I click split masked points, that's going to split the skull cap there into its own subtool, and it's actually going to break that off from the model. You can't see through to the other side, so I'm just going to go ahead and click Display Properties and turn on double-sided to make it easier to view. Now if I go back to my subtool menu here, take my skull, go to merge. I'm going to merge the skull back down into the subtool of the skull cap, and I will turn on weld, and that will weld the points back together. So if I click merge down, okay, it has now merged those two subtools together and those points were welded. You have the option to merge similar. Now, merge visible. What that will do is it will take visible subtools. So if I turn on the skull and I turn on, let's say, the cervical vertebrae, let me turn off solo so you can see both of them. And if I click merge visible, you'll see up here now in the tool menu, I have a new tool called merge skeleton. If I select that, it's just a copy of the skull and the cervical vertebrae merged together. Now, when we do our merging, we can turn on weld and we can turn on UV, and that will enable UVs in the merge subtool as well as meld the points together. So it's very, very useful to have these two options as well. So merging just allows us to merge subtools together, either by merging them down within the same stack. So for example, if I have the skull selected and I click merge down, click OK, it's just going to merge down the stack, or merge similar or merge visible, which will then merge into a brand new Z tool, which will pop up here in the tool palette. So moving down the list, we've got remesh, and remesh allows you to effect Boolean operations using these icons here within the subtool menu. Now this has really been supplanted by Dynamesh for the most part. There's nothing that you can do here that you can't really accomplish using Dynamesh in a way that I think is actually more efficient. So we're not going to go into our remesh options here. Instead, we'll talk about the same options doing Dynamesh in a later lesson. We are going to move down here to project and extract, which are two extremely useful tools under the subtool menu. Project allows you to project one subtool onto another, thereby capturing all of its detail and form. So this is going to be really useful when you've got one model and you want to capture the detail and the shape of another onto it. A good example of when that might come into play is when we're working in Dynamesh, we want to turn our Dynamesh into a subdivision level model. We can do that using projections, and that's something that we will talk about in a later lesson. Extraction is going to allow us to extract a masked area and turn it into a new subtool. Now that's extremely useful when we're doing things like creating costume elements or accessories or even skins. Extractions are very, very useful for that. So let's start out by looking at project. And to do this, we're going to need to open a new Z tool. So here we have a new Z tool. It's composed of eyes and teeth, and then a poly-painted head. Let's move that up so it's beneath the teeth. Now this poly-painted head has got quite a bit of detail sculpted into it. Now you see that there's another Z tool here, another subtool. If I select that, you see that's a very low resolution model with no poly paint. So what I will do here is I will divide this twice, and I am going to turn on visibility on the painted head with all the detail. I'm going to turn off visibility on the eyes and teeth. Under Project, there is a button for Project All. What this will do is it will project the currently selected Z tool onto any other visible Z tools. So that's why I turned off visibility on the eyes and teeth. So I will click Project All, and you see it is projected onto the other Z tool. If I turn off visibility on the original, you see it has projected. You'll see there's a few spots where it actually missed, and you'll also see it's actually picked up the poly paint as well. So if we undo that, you can see that's what we originally had, and then we project and we pick up the poly paint as well as the form. So how do we get those pieces that we missed? Let's go ahead and add another subdivision level, because I like to project at a lower subdivision level and then project again after adding another subdivision level. So I'm not trying to project millions of polygons at once. I just work my way up, capturing detail as I go. So I'm going to turn up my distance a little bit here. That distance slider is just the distance between the two meshes, which it will project before giving up. So if it's missing, if the distance is too low, it will not get to the other mesh when it's trying to project the detail. So turn visibility on the other again and click Project All. And there we go. Because I turned up that distance, you can see it actually captured those other areas. So we'll turn off visibility, and you can see there's very little difference between the two models now. A little bit of fidelity, just a little bit. So what I'll need to do is I'll add another couple of subdivision levels, turn on visibility on my high-res head again, and then I will project all. And now I'm going to capture all that really fine detail. You see it's going to take a little bit of time as it's projecting. It's going to capture all that real fine detail that's both painted and sculpted onto that mesh. So projections are extremely valuable when you're trying to transfer sculpting and painting across between two different models. So now if we turn off visibility, you see we've got all that detail and all those subdivision levels. So under Project, there's a few more sliders here. You see that there is the distance slider, and that is probably the most helpful one that I've ever come across. If I were to come here and let's go to our original and add a couple of horns there. Let's go back here, and I'll turn on visibility on both meshes. So let's say I want to project and capture those horns. What I can do is turn that distance slider up, or I can come down here and turn up projection shell. So if I turn that up, it gives me a visual feedback as to how far the projection will be. So if I click Project All now, ZBrush is going to think about it a bit. We're dealing with quite a few polygons at this point. We're about 2 million. We're about 1 million polygons at this point that is projecting between the two meshes. So it's got to do some processing, and there we go. So now if I turn off the original, you see it's projected to the distance of that projection shell that I created there. So if I turn on my visibility again, and this time I'm going to actually step down a subdivision level just to make things run a little bit faster. I'll turn that projection shell up even higher, and then I will click Project All. And you saw how far out that projection shell went that time, and if I turn off visibility, you see it's projected further. But the problem is, because I'm projecting so far, it's actually catching details over in this area here. So what I'll do is I'll undo those changes. There we go. And now I'm just going to mask the area that I want to project. I will turn visibility back on the area with the horns. I'm going to turn that projection shell back down. I'll turn my distance up. Now you can use your mean displacement tolerance slider to fine-tune that setting, and you can also use your project all blur to fine-tune it. Honestly, I very rarely, if ever, find myself using those two sliders. I really do just rely on my distance slider here. So now I'm going to project all. And if I turn off visibility, you'll see nothing happened. That's because I need to invert the mask. So now the unmasked area will project. So now if I project all, there you can see it has worked. And it worked much, much faster because I basically isolated just these points and said, hey, we're only going to project those points. So there we go. So that is projection, and this is something that's going to come in really handy again when we're doing Dynamesh and we want to turn our Dynamesh model back into a subdivision model. We can project a remeshed model onto it. You'll find this comes in very handy too when you're using ZRemesher. You're going to ZRemesh a model, and then you're going to want to capture your details onto that ZRemeshed version by using project. So it's extremely useful. It's one of the more powerful tools within the subtool palette here. So now let's take a look at extractions. So extractions allow you to create accessories based on masking. So let's say, in this case, I want to create a little hood or a helmet for this character here. Let's undo back before we did that extraction or that projection. And I'm going to use my mask to paint just a little skull cap here. Maybe this particular orc has a little helmet cap that it wears. So I'm going to paint the mask where I want that cap to be. I can paint out of the mask just like you would any other mask with Control-Alt, click and drag. Now I'm going to zoom in so I can see the edge of my extraction, and I'm going to press the extract button. And you see it creates an extraction based on the thickness setting here. Now if I feel that that's too thick, all I have to do is just change it. So if I move the model, that model disappears. That's because this extraction is not geometry yet. It's just a preview. I can come in here and I can set my thickness to 0.005 and then do the extraction again, and that gives me a real thin fabric-like form there. So now I will click Accept, and you see it creates a new subtool right there. Control, click and drag to clear the mask off of it, and that is extracted directly from that masked area. If I go into polyframe mode with Shift F, you can see it's actually polygrouped. Now it's hard to see because these polygroups are very similar in color, but if I Control Shift click on the inner shell, I can isolate that. If I Control Shift click on the outer shell, I can isolate that. And if I Control Shift click on the thickness, I can isolate that. So you can see there's 3 polygroups there, which means if I mask the inner shell, I can now use my Move brush to move and shape the outer shell without affecting how it sits against the head. So I can keep it fitting perfectly form-fitted onto the body. Now let's say I wanted to create a mask with eye holes in it. I'll just go ahead and hide that extraction and clear the mask. I'll just come right here and I'll just start to paint what I want my mask to look like. We'll just make it a bandit's mask that goes right here around the head. I'm going to Control, Alt, click and drag so I can get rid of any sort of areas that I don't want in my mask. Just like that. Now I want to make eye holes, so I'll make my eye holes just like this. There we go. Now when I'm ready to do my extraction, I can sharpen the edge by Control-Alt clicking on the mask. That'll sharpen the edge of my mask, and I will click Extract. If I like it, I click Accept, and there I have a bandit's mask which fits perfectly on my monster. And then I can turn back on the helmet. Maybe I want that mask to sit on the outside, so I'll just move it out on the outside of the helmet a little bit. There we go. So that is how we do extractions from subtools. So in this lesson, we've seen the power of the subtool menu. We've seen how impressive it is and how important it is to be able to have multiple subtools that you can manipulate independently, but keep grouped together into a single Z-tool. We've seen how to move objects around the Z-tool palette or the subtool palette and how to rename them. We've looked at how to split apart models into subtools and as well as how to merge them back together. And we've seen how to project between subtools and how to extract from them to create new subtools. So let's go ahead and move on to the next lesson.